Hi, everybody, and welcome to a classic mythology inspired. Is that a good way to say it? A Beowulf centric uh, episode of Words, Images, and Worlds. Also, comics related, so lots of fun things happening on this episode. And delighted, as always, to be talking with comics creator Alexis Fajardo. May I call you Lex,
Oh, of
Alexis? What
course.
would
Yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course, Jason. This is fun. Thank you for having me on. It
Yeah,
is
my pleasure.
yeah, classics of all stripes converging in this conversation.
That's
That's
right.
how I
That's
like
right.
to
Yeah.
spin it, whether it's classic comics or classic literature or epic poetry. That's all my jam. So
It's a good jam. It's a good
yeah.
jam. You and I have talked before. We did a little recorded talk about 2 years ago, and then last fall, you and I and Gareth Hines did a talk. It's on YouTube. Have you seen it on YouTube, that one?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
The
That
like
was
the
really fun.
first 10 minutes is me staring, like, what am I doing? But after that it gets better. When we get
Right.
you both on, it becomes much better. The
Right.
entertainment value increases greatly. So we won't have that lead in lag time this time. But but always
That
great to
was
talk with
that beginning was brutal only because, I think the technical difficulties they were challenging for all of us, and then and you had to muster through as the host, and it was a valiant effort and it worked great. And then when we all three got to chat, it was really fun. So I
that
really
was
enjoyed
fun.
that. Yeah.
And that talk has made an appearance in my classroom a couple of times this year, just talking about comics, graphic novels, classic stories. I've suffered through listening to my voice, but enjoyed hearing you and Gareth Hines talking with each other. And my
What's
students do find it entertaining that I'm sort of like staring into the camera at
right?
first. So
Well, can I ask, how do your students respond to that talk, but more specifically the subject matter? Are they keen on that world of mythology?
I think so. Yeah, with reading and with stories, it depends, but there's something about mythology that always captures at least a part of the class. And there are people that are not as into it. I have students that are really into like more young adult romance fiction stuff, which I would rather personally read Beowulf than that personally. So I try to share a lot of different things, but there are always mythology kids, and then there are always comics kids, and there are always kids that are sort of somewhere in between that really are captivated by a lot of it. So
Yeah, I
it,
was
it
certainly a
carries well.
mythology kid. That
Yeah.
was really. I remember. I mean, I always gravitated to it on my own. And then when we had those sessions in class, it just was. I was one of the. There was like a little cadre of us. We were super excited to just jump into anything mythology related. So,
Yeah.
um, and that sort of interest and fire and enthusiasm that I had when I was like 8 has just sort of carried on, 40 odd years later. So that's sort of like when I write my books, I sometimes think about like, okay, who was I at that time in fifth or sixth grade, and can I write
hmm
that kid? And it's a good thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, there's so much of what I love that I have memories of reading it at home, but I don't have like memories of that great lesson at school. So I think I try to be that teacher that brings some of those things in because the only connection to comics and mythology that I had as a kid in like elementary school was an adaptation of Clash of the Titans comics
Okay.
adaptation in the school library, and it was like the one that I checked out the most. I found a copy of it at a flea market later and continue to enjoy it that way. Um, I don't remember connecting with mythology in the classroom because it wasn't there, but I remember reading comics and I remember having like action figures of Zeus and different characters.
Oh, sure. From
Um,
probably Clash of the Titans, right?
well,
The movie.
actually, these were it was a different set. I
Oh,
never
okay.
made got my hands across any copies or any yeah, I guess copies would be the word of the action figures from Clash of the Titans. I need to eBay some of those. That would be good. That would be cool. Um, but there was like this little host of mostly Greek and Roman mythology action figures that I got through some mail order catalog. And they weren't posable, but I remember playing with them and Iron Man and Thor and things like that. And it just kind of all weaved together in my mind in
Yeah.
some crazy way.
Well, and that makes perfect sense because, I often, when I do school presentations, I always lead with showing the kids the heroes they know, which are Spider-Man and Iron Man and the DC and Marvel characters, and kind
Hmm.
of tail it back to Perseus and Odysseus and Heracles and all those guys because they're the same. They're just from different time periods and genres, but the
Yeah.
heroic story is superheroes are our modern day mythology.
Hmm.
And so that seems it seems to be a link that they glom onto pretty quickly, and it just sort of makes the whole presentation more exciting for them.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about Spider-Man being part of that, but I mean, you've got Anansi, right? And Ariadne and all of these characters that are sort of connected to spiders in that way.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's definitely that link. Were you a comics kid growing up as well?
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. There are certain comics that I remember being introduced to when I was like eight or nine. Specifically, one would be a French comic called Asterix that always sort of
Hmm. Hmm.
beautifully drawn, and that's still sort of in my back pocket as something I like to reference and look to. But then there was that moment when I started to discover comics on my own, and we had the corner store that across from the park that we lived, and I think I would have been maybe 9 or 10 when I discovered Marvel comics. I mean, I always loved Spider-Man. I was that kid who like that was my hero, but I never read the comics. And then I started to go through and pick up the issues. And there was a summer, I remember specifically, it was the summer of Atlantis Attacks, which was like the Marvel annual that was coming out. And so every annual, whether it was Daredevil or Spider-Man or Fantastic Four, would have that story that was
Hmm.
linked. But then it had all this great back matter, which was like had the origin of Spider-Man or the origin of these other characters. And so I could get into, I became a Marvel zombie pretty quick.
Yeah,
And then I would
yeah.
go to, find the back issues, and that was actually not too different again from discovering those Greek or Norse stories because there's so many variations of those stories and different storytellers, whether it's Homer or somebody who's modern like Mary Renaud or and they're doing their versions. And so when you're digging through the library for those quote unquote back issues of mythology, it's very akin to like digging through the long boxes at the
Mm,
comic shop,
hmm.
trying
Hmm.
to piece together the mythology of the X-Men or what have you. So those links have always been pretty prevalent in my mind, and I went through the whole image phase that I was part of that
Definitely.
boom as well, and now I sort of dip in and out of Marvel comics. I don't read them as religiously as I used to, and haven't in many years. But I think the movies, the good ones at least, kind of scratch that itch.
Yeah.
And there are always those graphic novels that I'll gravitate to, or specific runs that I think are well done. And to your point earlier about the connection of Spider-Man and perhaps mythology, J. Michael Straczynski did an interesting run, I think in the maybe mid 2000s on Spider-Man, and he approached it from the totemistic world of spider mythology. And some people
Hmm.
it didn't work for a lot of fans, but I thought it was interesting, only because it sort of narratively, touches on what we're talking about right now. So yeah, I'm a Marvel zombie, a comic zombie, love it all.
And so you have this really nice marriage of all of that. That's part of the Kid Beowulf series, which
Mm.
I discovered sometime through like NetGalley or one of those places, and I've continued to follow it since then. So any sort of like elevator pitch, teacher tease, reader sort of glimpse that you'd like to share for people that aren't as familiar with Kid Beowulf.
Sure. Yeah. So, Kid Beowulf, it's inspired by the epic poem Beowulf, and it recasts the lead characters, Beowulf the Viking and Grendel the mere monster, as opposed to arch enemies in the epic. They are 12-year-old twin brothers. And the first book, which came out originally black and white back in 2008, and then republished with Andrews McMeel in 2016, full color. That one is called The Bloodbound Oath, and it explains the mysterious origin of the brothers, like where they came from, how they got to be twins. It's a familial story. So that first book, we discover Beowulf and Grendel's great grandfather, the mistakes he made that sort of led to their birth. And then after that, pardon me, the story becomes a travelogue for Beowulf and Grendel across Europe and Asia through the different mythologies and legends that populated those different countries. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
book two, they go to France. They meet Charlemagne, all of his knights. It's very much inspired by the Song of Roland, which is a French epic. Book three, they go into Spain and they meet El Cid. So it's very much a medieval romance epic inspired by the Spanish epic. Book four, they go and meet Romulus and Remus. So another pair of
Mm-hmm.
twins and about the founding of Rome. And book five, I'm sort of just scratching away at the surface of that story right now. But that will be inspired by the Odyssey. So
Oh,
we're
love it.
finally getting to that part of the world that I'm really excited about because going back to our earlier conversation, like 8-year-old me is totally jazzed about getting into Greek mythology. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
so I'm sort of breaking down that story, figuring out what I want, Beowulf and Grendel to be doing. But it's very much inspired by not only those stories, but kind of the Joseph Campbell approach to world mythology and how all those
Mm-hmm.
things and threads are interconnected. And I like Beowulf in particular, the epic, for a number of reasons. Uh, but one that I think is interesting is that it's the epic itself sort of lives in this space that is at once, mythological and legendary in the sense that you've got Beowulf the Viking and the dragon and the monsters and all these mythological elements. But then it's also because it was first written down, by a nameless monk. It has this overtone of like this Christian theology to it. So it's sort of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so it, in terms of timelines, it kind of lives in this middle space where you can sort of go forward to other times like Roland and El Cid, as I mentioned, or you can go backward in terms of like the Greek mythology and stuff. So it's completely anachronistic. Like these timelines do not match up. If you were to actually look at the history books and the epics and map them across my stories, but metaphorically, I feel like the idea that Beowulf and Grendel sort of, whatever country they're going to is the golden age
Mm-hmm.
of that culture and that epic that's connected to it. Um, and for me, because as we said before, I'm a mythology buff, it gives me an opportunity to have conversations with those stories and um, and share them with younger readers who might not be familiar with these heroes. Just sort of like a bit of a primer, but mostly just a fun adventure story that takes place in these fantasy worlds.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And I won't almost want to pull in like a teacher sidebar here and go, like you've got geography, you've got culture, history and religions, you've got, of course, the literacy aspects of it, you've got the art side of the books. And so there are lots of connections, so many connections to explore through those. And so wonderful that you kind of pull that willing suspension and give the characters the chance to go around and kind of connect with this wider view of stories too, with that like hero's journey kind of thing that you're after and that you mentioned. So, so many possibilities there. And I also mentioned there's a teacher's guide for at
Yes, yeah.
least one of the
There
books
are
or a couple.
all all four of the main books have teachers' guides that were done with the great organization Reading with Pictures.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So yeah, we worked together and we built these guides that have activities and they have sort of vocabulary sections. Actually, everything you just listed about geography and culture, and those are sort of part of those guides as well. And those are available. It's a free resource on my website. If you go to kidbeowulf.com, there's a little tab that says Teach, and
mm-hmm.
within that are these downloadable PDFs that I encourage folks to check out. And those are really fun to do too, because honestly, I don't really ever think about the teaching component of the stories when I'm writing them. It's really just, can I tell the best story I can and
Yeah.
touch on the things and the themes that I want to, that resonate with me in the original source material. And then it's a happy accident that teachers like yourself see all these other connections that weren't, they're clearly there because of the source material has been with us for so long. And it's, but as a creator, it's not necessarily top of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's great to have smarter people like you figure out all those threads and, like, package them and bring them to the kids. And I can just sit back and say, yeah, I meant to do that. Sure, of course. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's the cool thing about stories too. Is so often, if it's a story that you put yourself into, if it even a poem, thinking about, the history of these works as epic poems, um, sharing something out in the world creates those possibilities for people to come along and respond to it, share about it, bring their own history to it. Um, so that's kind of a nice affordance. And Kylene Beers, this author about literacy, says, books are first written to be loved. You have to love them first, and
yes,
then you can study them, then you can teach them. But all of those things that you bring as the author and the artist are so important for
yeah.
building that.
And that goes directly back to, when I engage with the epics myself, I'm reading them first and foremost just as a fun story. And that's how they
Hmm.
were initially intended. Beowulf was told around the campfire. It was the quote unquote movie of the week for the tribe, for the clan.
Hmm.
Same with the Odyssey and Gilgamesh and what have you. So, um, everything that's within the story is that, cultural osmosis that the people who are listening to the story can see, oh, that's what it means to be a good hero. That's the right moral ethical path to take. This is what you do when you're in danger. This is a story to with survival tactics, all that stuff. But
Hmm.
yeah, we're just reading it because it's a great story. And then when you do the reread, and you work with other critical texts, you can sort of see all the things that are built in. So as someone who works with these stories, I'm constantly going back to the source material and reading them,
Hmm.
because there's always something new I'm reminded of, or first introduced to again, and it's so that's why I feel like I could just keep telling these stories. It's fine. I mean, I've got it more or less all mapped out. I know where I want Beowulf and Grendel to go from book to book,
Love it.
the struggle that they're going to go through. Because oftentimes I describe it as a prequel to Beowulf. So
Mm-hmm.
the confrontation that Beowulf and Grendel have in the original epic poem, that's always alluded to in these stories, and as brothers, how do they deal with that, and then the other components, similar, that are noted in things like Joseph Campbell, like world mythology and monsters and monster slayers and all that good stuff is just rolled in together. So the superstructure of the Kid Beowulf story is this relationship between the brothers, and if you know the original epic poem, you'll know that that confrontation is to come. So it's all about, will they or won't they fight each other, and so playing around with those ideas is as a storyteller is really fun to explore.
Yeah, yeah, and I love the spin. I love the different way of looking at the classic story, because that's also an important part of it. Of, there are retellings and there are parts that you get to choose to retell, but then you get to take your own creative license. And you also have Hama, the
Yes.
children's, sort of a more of a picture book sort of entry into the series. So
Right.
readers can connect with that and then sort of grow into the series along with you too.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Hama is Beowulf and Grendel's stalwart companion. It's Hama the pig. He's a pig that walks upright and is very smart, because as pigs are. And
Hmm. Hmm.
we meet him in the first book, and he follows Beowulf and Grendel on all their adventures. He's sort of like a little like an R2D2 analog, in that you know he's smart. He doesn't speak, but he's always getting his Beowulf and Grendel out of a jam through his own wits. But I thought it would be fun. I do, when I do a lot of book conventions and author shows and whatnot, my stuff, I usually say if you're 8 years old and up, you're going to like Kid Beowulf. But there are those younger kids, maybe those siblings who come of those older kids
Hmm.
that come to my table and are just attracted to the bright colors and the characters and specifically Hama. So I thought, oh, it'd be fun to just do a storybook about Hama the pig, how he met Beowulf, and really kind of gear it to those younger readers to give them something of their own, and then lead them, as you say, lead them into the graphic novel. And
Yeah.
and we've actually spun out the storybook into I'm playing with the format of a 4-panel comic strip featuring
Yeah.
Hama and this other character who appeared in book 4, who was a woodpecker, Peaky the woodpecker, and they have a fun sort of dynamic, kind of like a Snoopy Woodstock thing that I'm just sort of playing with. But again, sort of thinking of those super young readers, but those early readers who might not be ready for like the big word balloons and trying to keep it like a pantomime comic strip. And it's challenging, but it's fun because those characters are so fun to draw. And and as a creator, it sort of forces me to like work really simply, which is tough for me. There are some cartoonists who are really good at just paring down and getting to that headspace, but for me, it's a real exercise. So I'm trying my hand at that, and it's sort of a Hama, the spinoff of Hama, so a Hama spinoff. So
Nice, nice. Love it.
yeah,
So you also have Songs and Sagas.
yeah,
It's currently under Kickstarter campaign, is that right?
yeah. It's we're doing it through crowdfunder, which is akin to Kickstarter. So it's a crowdfunding campaign to help with the publication costs and getting the book out into the world for the new book in the series called Songs and Sagas, which is basically a collection of short stories. And so in between these big fat 4 books that I've done, each of which is about 200 pages each, I will occasionally take a break and do a short story. It kind of keeps me just because it takes so much energy just to do a full graphic novel.
Hmm.
Uh, and then I'm creating these side characters who are really interesting, and I want to like see what they're about. So I sort of carve out space to do these shorter stories, and I've done enough of them that they comprise this graphic novel. So here's a look at that. Um,
Lovely,
and
very
Songs and
lovely.
Sagas has thank you. It's got 5 stories, and uh, it's full color, and we're crowdfunding it now. And they're really fun for a lot of different reasons. I like doing the short stories because each one gives me a different challenge. So, for instance, there's a story called Lay of the Last Survivor, again, inspired by Beowulf. But I wanted to do just a chase story and pantomime. And like, so there's no dialogue. It's just one of the characters falls falls upon this Viking village that's been raided, and then a chase ensues, and it's all about her trying to survive this chase, and it's all just done visually. And then there's another story that's like a 15 pager, which features Beowulf and Grendel, and it's very comedic. And then there's some other stories that are a little more dark and fanciful. So it plays with tone, it plays with different characters that we've discovered in the big books. It reveals Easter eggs. And it's also the connective tissue between books 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. So I'm excited to finally like have enough stories to put together a book,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that'll so as you say, the crowdfunder is happening this month, but the book will come out in October of 2023. And if people go to kidbeowulf.com, they'll be able to get one or the other. They can support the crowdfunder, or if they're listening to this later, they can order the book there too.
Awesome, awesome. And I'll be sure and I'll share the link on the Spotify version of this as well.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other spaces before we get to the end of our episode? Any spaces that readers can go, upcoming appearances, web spaces that are particularly helpful or anything like that?
Yeah. For those who are on social media, they can find me at Lex Fajardo Art, both on Instagram, what's left of Twitter. Uh, and but I always like to direct people directly to my website because that's
Mhm.
I know it's old fashioned, but it's the hub, and it's also the best place to read my comics, and you can read a bunch of them for free. And then if you like them and you want to, support the cause. There's opportunities to be a patron through Patreon or support the crowdfunder. And and then in terms of like real world appearances, 2023 marks the 20th anniversary of me doing Kid Beowulf, which is strangely
Very
astonishing
cool.
to me. So I've sort of been doing some appearances at comic conventions and the like. And the next one that comes up will be Comic Con in San
Oh,
Diego.
nice.
So
Nice.
I'll be doing a couple of signings at different booths. So if folks go to kidbeowulf.com, I'll have that information there. And I'm always looking forward to, like, I do talks at uh well, education, conferences that we've talked about, whether it's ALA or NCTE or
Hmm.
uh, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's always fun to share what I've gleaned over the 20 years of doing this and hopefully inspire people who either want to do it themselves or talk shop with people like yourself about the process. It's really fun. So I'm really fortunate, and I just love um, pretty much all aspects of making comics,
Awesome.
except
Awesome.
for maybe the writing. The writing is really hard. Now that I think about it, like I'm in the middle of like trying to figure out a couple of stories, and I'm like, dang, are you? What's also interesting as a creator, and I don't know if you've heard this from other folks you've interviewed, but once you actually create and you get through the hurdles of all that, and you put the book on the shelf, and then you come back to the next book to create again. Like for me, I've like completely forgotten how to do it all. Like I don't know if like your brain is sort of, because it's so arduous, is sort of tricking you into like forgetting how to draw, how to write, how to, because if we
Mm-hmm.
knew, we wouldn't keep doing it. I don't know, but that's something I always struggle with. It's like, how do I do this? So always going back to so
I know it's an arduous journey. It's a definitely a labor of love that a lot of people that I talk with, especially people that have done like, maybe illustrated like picture books or shorter form works that then take on a graphic novel, are like, I wish someone had told me that there's
yeah.
all this work. But then it seems to be worth it for creators that really enjoy the medium too, and definitely worth it for readers. So.
Yeah, and it certainly is satisfying when you have that big chunk of work in front of you. I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
I did that, and that person is reading it and they're enjoying it, and they're asking for the next one. And
Yeah.
and of course they, younger kids, they have no idea what it takes to create these things. So they are hungry for that next installment. And I always feel bad about saying, well, I'm working on it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you're 8. It's not going to be done until you're 10. I hope you're still with me. So they generally come back. So
And it's nice to have a full epic to enjoy. And I find myself rereading a ton of books that I enjoy and going back. And there's so much to take in with the art that's there, the storyline. So definitely, I think it's Raina Telgemeier that says like, slow down, look at those panels a little bit, and take some of that in
yeah,
while the author is creating the next one. Enjoy and sort of savor the one that's out. So.
yeah, it's great advice. And then, I often tell, fans who are hungry for the next book in my series, and when they hear it's going to take so long, I point them to other books that are like mine. Like if you
Mhm.
like my stuff, you're going to love, um, stuff like Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo or Jeff Smith's Bone, or, as I said before, Asterix, or Chris Schweitzer's work, who I'm a big fan of. He's great at history and comics. And so there's so much out there now. You
Yeah.
go to your library, go to Barnes and Noble, you are going to find so many worlds to just sort of dive into that are going to, you know, my stuff or these other artists that you like, whose work you're waiting for, it's going to be there when you come back. So
Yeah.
just spread the wealth, because there's a lot out there.
True, true, true. And I love that focus on highlighting folks out there like yourself that are doing this work, and uh you don't have enough time in a lifetime to read it all. So
No,
there's a lot to enjoy. It's a
for
good
sure.
time.
Yes, yeah, we are fortunate for
Yeah,
sure.
very much. Well, anything else that you want to make sure to mention before we run out of time on the episode?
No, this has been really fun. Again, I would just let folks know if they're interested, and they're just coming to Kid Beowulf for the first time, go to kidbeowulf.com. All the back catalog is there for them to explore. And then the new book, Songs and Sagas, is also a great primer too, because it's these short stories, and they're all self-contained, and it's a good way to sort of dive into the mythos, and yeah, when you're making these comics, it's you can never have too many or too few readers, so
Hmm.
more the merrier. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And always glad to share about your work and your books. And you shared songs and sagas with me, so I'll be finding some places to do some writing about that and sharing about it as well. And well
oh,
worth the
wonderful.
journey. Well worth it.
Cool. Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, always great to talk with you.